rebel force has penetrated the shield and landed on Endor.
This is where the fun begins.
A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away.
This is Rebel Force Radio.
Your source for the Force.
Star Wars news and commentary.
With Jason Swank and Jimmy Mack.
I've seen Star Wars 500 times.
Star Wars #1!
This station is now the ultimate power in the universe. I suggest we use it.
Now it's time for Rebel Force Radio.
We would be honored if you would join us.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. If you haven't joined us for any of the AHSOKA after shows, you really must. We had such an awesome crowd this week. We had one of our biggest crowds yet for a live after show. Tons of chatter going on in the live chat. A lot of very generous super chats. So if you were a part of that, really appreciate it. Thank you very much. It goes a long way to help us out here at Rebel Force Radio. But just the real-time feedback of us all experiencing this new series together is fantastic. And I like that there have been ups and downs. I know for a lot of people that listen to Rebel Force Radio, they get a little because we have a knack for displaying great enthusiasm for Star Wars. We've been doing it for 17 years, of course, and we've been fans all our lives. And so it's a little disappointing. I get it for some listeners if we don't share the same enthusiasm about the same episode or the same characters or what have you. So I get all of that. But you have to understand that we're keeping it in the family here as Star Wars fans. We're having these discussions, and there's so much about all of this that we love. I know there's so much about it that you all love. So we're not always going to like the same thing at the same time, but most of us, if not all of us, thought this week's episode was a banger. It was so great. So please do check that out. All of the after shows are available to listen to on demand. There's the audio podcast, and also the live stream videos are archived over on the Rebel Force Radio YouTube channel. That is the best place to know if we're going live with a after show. It's pretty predictable, though. Wednesday nights, 8:00 p.m. Eastern time. But this is the flagship show. This is the show that started it all. This is where it's sort of Star Wars potpourri. You never know what we're going to be talking about. Like this week, of course, lots of AHSOKA talk. We do have some interview highlights with a couple of the stars. Plus, Liam Neeson, who never disappoints, showing up on Conan O'Brien's podcast. And also a very special treat towards the end. So you want to make sure we do put the milk at the back of the store, if you will, at the end of the program. We're going to be going club hopping with Puppet Lando. That's right, Puppet Lando. Going to take us clubbing. And by we, I mean, of course, not just me. My name's Jason. If you're new to the program, and with me, as always, my good friend and yours, and a good friend of Puppet Lando's, Jimmy Mack.
Hey, Jason. Hey, Star Wars fans. Yes, indeedy, I am good friends with Puppet Lando, and we're going club hopping with Puppet Lando. What the heck does that mean?
You're kind of his landlord, aren't you?
Yeah, I guess he does kind of shack up here. It's kind of noisy at night, too.
Oh, I bet.
Puppet Lando always wants his felt to be felt. But he does go out.
When the trunks are rocking, don't come a knocking, I guess.
Exactly. So, yeah, we go club hopping with Puppet Lando, and what does that mean? You have to stay tuned to find out. Or you can just go to the World Between Worlds and go right to the end of the show via fast forward.
It's that simple. That's what we learned.
That simple. Yeah, your fast forward and rewind buttons are kind of like the World Between Worlds as you control the galaxy of podcasts.
Yeah.
So I went down the rabbit hole today, researching that crazy World Between Worlds.
I'm glad you did, because there was so many people in the chat speaking very, very sure of themselves about what the World Between Worlds is, what it can do, what it can't do, and all of that. And my contention is, and we'll see where your research has led you, my contention is that nobody really knows, that it's still something that's evolving and changing. But boy, they seem to like, oh, wow, you don't know about World Between. Here's how it works.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have to say that I think that its usage is going to be conservative as far as changing the story around? Will we see anything as drastic as reaching in and pulling someone away from their death right as they're at the doorstep, as is the case with Ezra and Ahsoka? I don't know. I hope not. I hope the world between worlds exists strictly as a way of providing us a physical manifestation of the Force, but it's not actually a place they're going. They're going there in their heads. It's like when Yoda says, "Long have I watched this one." Well, what does that mean? You're on Dagobah and he's on Tatooine. Yoda is accessing the Force, and it's the world between worlds, which Filoni is using as a storytelling device to provide us visual representation.
Now, did you add this one a long time have I watched? Did you add that yourself, or is that part of the research that you found? Because I really like that. I hadn't thought of that.
No, that's my conclusion. I'm presenting my conclusion first.
Okay.
My research came in the way of these audio sound bites you're going to hear. First from Taylor Gray, who played Ezra in Star Wars Rebels. And then we'll hear from Dave Filoni. These are interviews conducted by StarWars.com back in 2017. And I pulled some world between worlds chunks for you.
Chunky. Not the smooth world between worlds.
One time I left world between world chunks in my toilet, and it was after a very long evening. So here's Taylor Gray talking to StarWars.com back in 2017 about what Dave Filoni told him specifically about the world between worlds.
The way Dave explained it was actually pretty clear, more clear than the Lothwolves and how they interact with the Force. But it's essentially a place where you can go and access anything. Time is not a concrete thing. Time is flexible. You can go forward, backwards, any which way.
You can access anything, time, move backwards, forwards. This is Dave Filoni by way of Taylor Gray.
Yes.
Okay.
But still, it's not physical manifestation.
Right.
You can't actually go there. And when Ezra pulled Ahsoka out of the Malachor temple when she was dueling Darth Vader, she actually had to go back to that environment to be able to emerge from the world between worlds. Like, she couldn't leave with Ezra because that was all in his head.
Right.
So, but yet, I think it's still debatable whether or not Ezra actually saved Ahsoka or whether Ezra actually interfered. But he was able to have a moment with Ahsoka as it was all going down. And I think Ahsoka's ability then was, her Force ability increased because she was granted access to the world between worlds. So she was able then to return to the duel with Darth Vader and survive it. But it was never explicitly stated that she didn't survive it.
Right. What I don't understand is how, did Ezra find Ahsoka on accident? Or was he specifically looking for that moment in time? It's like, once you access the world between worlds, do you just sort of look behind a bunch of doors until you find the one that you're looking for? That always felt kind of random to me a little bit. Or was it his Force connection to Ahsoka that led him to her at that moment?
All right, we have a clip from Filoni where he goes into some detail about world between worlds. We have actually two clips from Filoni. The first one, he's talking to StarWars.com. And I think maybe some of the insight he provides will answer some of those questions you're throwing out there. The reason why Ezra can just find a random portal and it means something to him is because it's his connection to the Force.
Okay.
People see different things when they access the world between worlds. You can't give someone a map to it and say, yeah, it's the third portal on the left. Because the third portal on the left will be different for that person.
That's what,
depending on their force connections.
Not to mixed franchises, but I was thinking about that with the new Indiana Jones movie, where they had this map with this device that they used, and they knew that if they went through that particular burst of clouds or whatever it was, that it would send them to a very precise moment and time, a very decisive moment. And that's what I was thinking about, this world between worlds. Oh, I want to be there at the moment she's about to be slain by Darth Vader so that I can pull her out and rescue her. And then I was thinking, well, what impact does that have on the timeline? Are you essentially changing history or changing the future?
Well, here's Filoni. He talks about it. Maybe some of your questions will be answered.
Okay.
I always have several small goals. One of the things I wanted to do was find a way to tie together all of the Star Wars films and animated series in one place so that people get this idea that this is all a connected thing, that they're not desperate from each other, that they are inclusive of each other. And I believe that Star Wars has this grandeur to it. I believe the Force has this infinite space to it. So I started seeding in season 1 this idea of a place where there are stars. When Ezra's in the Jedi Temple and he gets his lightsaber crystal, he is in that world between worlds. He just doesn't know it yet because he's too naive and he's not fully unlocked the next time he's there with Yoda. And Yoda obviously knows about it because Yoda's talking to him through this as some kind of conveyance where they can both exist in this place, but they probably aren't very far from where they are physically. But it doesn't have anything to do with the physical. It has to do with kind of where they believe they are and where they are mentally. So finally, when he unlocks all the secrets, he can go into this place and have more of an awareness of what's actually going on. And this is when the full world is revealed to him, and then he knows that evil also wants it. Because things like that are too good to be true, evil always wants those things to destroy them and to use them for ill purposes.
One key thing that doesn't have a lot to do with the world between worlds, but I think is very relevant as Filoni takes on more and more of a leadership position within the creative there, he states his goal, Jim, there, which is I want to create a seamless connection between animation and live action. So we know that drives Filoni. So
yes,
that's
but to what end? To what end?
Well, right.
I mean, why is that necessary in the first place? We all see the Star Wars logo, and I think we get it. Why do we need to have some interdimensional manifestation that we can see incorporated into the stories? What purpose does that serve?
Well,
the ability to retcon, the ability to reboot might be the prime motivator for this. Potentially.
Yeah.
Potentially.
I think maybe I'm being naive about this, but my thought was when I heard him say those words from back in 2017, that it might have had more to do with less about the story per se and more about the perception, the quality of the storytelling and the work that's coming out, that he's wanted to create this seamlessness. And then he goes in and talks about world between worlds and how Ezra has experienced it multiple times and he seeded it throughout Rebels. I didn't necessarily think at the time that the world between worlds was a device or a way to ensure that seamlessness, but certainly another way to take it. Maybe that is his insurance policy. I said on the after show this week that it is, cynically I say it's an insurance policy to make sure that you never lose your best characters. And hell, if Dave didn't actually use it to save his favorite character, which is Ahsoka Tano. Ahsoka lives. #.
Yeah. But again, it was Dave Filoni who put her on ice essentially at the end of season 2 of Rebels. And she didn't return until that world between worlds moment late in season 4.
Yeah.
So it is a bit confusing. And also something that's being presented on the Ahsoka show that isn't really evident in the Rebels show is like this family connection between Ahsoka and the members of the Ghost. And a relationship between her and Sabine is virtually non-existent in Rebels.
Right.
I just want to point that out. I mean, it's not a criticism. These are observations. But there's very little interaction between Sabine and Ahsoka in Rebels. But we do have that end sequence there when Ahsoka the White appears in front of Sabine, which I maintain will be the final scene of season 1. I know we've already seen it. We've seen her walk down those steps toward the mural. We saw her put her finger up on Ezra's cheek as he's illustrated in the mural, and she turns around and there's Ahsoka standing there. But what we saw was Ahsoka wearing a brown coat, and she didn't have her fancy staff with the ring on top of it. So I think Ahsoka's going to go through a world between worlds transformation before she returns to fight the good fight. And then the series will wrap up with that moment between Sabine and Ahsoka, shot once again the same way. Sabine walking down the steps toward the mural, touching the cheek of Ezra, and then turning around and seeing Ahsoka. Boom. And it'll be kind of that thing that George Lucas liked to say about the stanzas repeating and whatnot.
Right, the rhyming. Something else that came up on this week's after show with regarding the World Between Worlds. Well, not specifically World Between Worlds, but you had made the claim that you thought that perhaps we might find out that Thrawn is using Ezra as a way to communicate with Morgan Elsbeth. So, sort of that you I think you said the receiver and the transmitter. Were you thinking at the time that it was potentially using the World Between Worlds? Because now I'm thinking if they're introducing World Between Worlds, and we know that Morgan Elsbeth has been able to communicate with Thrawn across these vast expanses of space, and we know Thrawn, and we know Ezra can get into the World Between Worlds.
Yeah, but I mean, at will, Ezra can get. I mean, he has. So let's listen to this last clip from Filoni, because this is where he's at his most revealing. I believe, where he goes into the most detail about World Between Worlds. It's from the Rebels Season 4 Blu-ray. There's a little featurette on there called Force of Rebellion. Force of Rebellion. And it's a very informative featurette. And here is a clip of Dave Filoni talking about the World Between Worlds.
The World Between Worlds, then, it's not about time travel. It's really not about time travel at all. It's just about a place where everything comes together and you hear different things echoing throughout time because it's all fluid in that moment, in that place. It's not this material thing that's linear. Everything is occurring all the time. I don't know how real it actually is. I don't want to define that for people anyway, but it's not this place of gateways and doorways that you just go in and out of. Now, Ezra can pull Ahsoka into that world. But remember, she's smart enough to know that she can't leave that world through his door. She'll be destroying the natural balance and order of things. She has to go back from where she came. But it's not this system of doorways like you're on an elevator, getting off on different floors and different times. It's more like what the wolf tells Ezra. It's more about knowledge. Knowledge that you can use for your benefit of good, or knowledge that will lead to destruction. That's what it's about. But it's not my intention that it be this ability to walk through into somebody else's world.
Okay. So she's about ready to be delivered the death blow by Vader. Ezra pulls her in. She spends her time in World Between Worlds. She has to go back to the real world through the same door. And somehow she's able to use what she learns in the World Between Worlds to escape Vader. I don't want to say defeat him, but escape him.
Right. That's where I'm leaning toward.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah. And, Filoni's, he's laying heavy mystical stuff on us. Talking wolves, the Bendu, whales that fly through hyperspace, World Between Worlds. I just don't want the human relatability to be stripped away from Star Wars. Because at the end of the day, I mean, the original film was just about going off on your own, finding yourself, finding your full potential. It's a very human story, dealing with the sins of the father, all of those things.
Yeah. And like George says, it's truly about family. family dynamics. He always has said that it was a story about family. They're all dealing with family or a lack of family. Maybe in the case of Han Solo, or losing family like Leia.
Yeah, exactly. And I fear this stuff is going to strip away a lot of human relatability from the story and just get it really bogged down in a lot of mythical and it's real wild fantasy elements.
I agree with you. I think that has always been, or traditionally been, a distinction between Star Wars and some of the big science fiction franchises. I'm looking at Trek. The cost of entry to some of these. Doctor Who, which has a legacy of, I think it might even outdate Trek. I'm not quite sure, but they're pretty contemporary. Trek's now in its starting in its 7th decade. Star Wars will be going to its 5th. But Star Wars was sort of science fiction for the average Joe in a way, because it was much more relatable. The cost of entry was not as high. George painted in very broad strokes, as I like to say. Big, sort of epic, operatic feelings on display that are very relatable. Themes, huge themes. And so I share your concern, or the potential for this to get so heavy by its own mythology and all of these little twists and turns and nuances and things that people will just go, I have no idea what's going on here. I have no idea. Right. Why is this person showing? Why is that person showing up?
Yeah. And Dave is heavily influenced by Tolkien. Mm-hmm. And some of his stuff can get very confusing, but Lord of the Rings is basically, at the end of the day, a story about the little guy and pulling for the underdog. And despite all of the crazy, wild, mystical things happening around every corner, it's a show about friendship. It's a show about, much like Luke Skywalker's tale, when you think of Bilbo Baggins and the other Bagginses, Frodo. Uh-huh. This is about pushing yourself to the limits, finding your full potential, going beyond what's expected of you.
Right.
And staying true to your word. Those are heavy elements in the storytelling in Lord of the Rings. And when I look at it that way, and despite all of the crazy, mystical, magical things that happen that I find very unrelatable, at its core is a very human story. And I think that's the trick. And I think with Filoni establishing the crew of the Ghost is such a tight-knit family, I think that's a really good place to start as far as the relatability of this in the foundation of the story itself. So I don't think my fears are really justified, but I think they do exist to at least brace me for if things really just go too off the rails and it becomes too fantasy.
Yeah.
Fantasy, of course, a huge element of Star Wars. Nobody's going to debate that, but it's an element. It doesn't consume the entire thing because there's a very human story going on there. And then, of course, the Western comes into play and all those Japanese influences and Joseph Campbell for cry-eye.
Well, and that's what made
a lot of things.
I think that's what really helped the popularity of The Mandalorian, was because it went back to some of those big themes and those big influences, and it was accessible to a lot of people. And yes, I want them to make Star Wars for Star Wars fans. Of course, we want that. I like fan service. I'm a fan. I want to be served stuff that I want to see, stuff that I think's cool. But I also want, for the longevity of the franchise, I want it to be accessible to where new fans are attracted. I want my kids to like it. I want my kids' friends to like it. I want couples and people to be able to sit down and enjoy this stuff together without like, who's this again and who's that again? And I also understand that these things grow and they evolve and new characters are introduced. So I'm not naive about that. I just, it's all about balance. Star Wars is about, the Force is about balance. Star Wars is about balance. So balance the things that we love and the legacy with some of the new stuff that you want to do.
Here, Jason. Here. So we are going to continue with our after show again this week because there's just so much going on. In a week like this, there's a lot of moving parts. And yeah, especially me, I was throwing down a lot of opinion last night about the way I think the story is being laid out in front of us. I'm not struggling with it because I know all of the key players and parts and stuff, but I'm more interested in picking apart the way the story is being told. That might be a different approach for me when I'm soaking in new Star Wars and stuff, but they're just things that are kind of sticking out to me. Mm-hmm. And one of those things is Thrawn. I don't think he's been established at all in Star Wars animation nor live action as the end-all threat, especially considering he's been out in another galaxy, lacking resources. I just don't understand where his clout is coming from and why everyone is so consumed with his return, as if a guy just showing up is going to change everything. I don't think Thrawn has. I don't think he's earned that as a character. And I'm not talking about the 30 years of novels and things like that. I'm talking about the story that's being told right in front of us right now. What is the big threat of Grand Admiral Thrawn? So we spoke a lot about that on the show last night. We got an email here from Matthew. And Matthew says, subject line, why you both have no idea about Thrawn.
Ooh.
Okay. All right.
Better back it up with that subject line, buddy.
That's an interesting icebreaker, but let's dive in. He says, I'll keep it simple, and I don't even have to use book material. First off, in every single engagement that Thrawn has in Rebels is a win, except for 2 instances that gave him an L.
They're all wins. Well, except those 2.
Except those 2 massive
they're
ones.
all wins.
That completely sucked him out of the big picture to begin with. What makes him dangerous is the fact that these losses are caused by outside factors that he has no way to predict because he has no previous knowledge to factor into his tactical brilliance. Well, I mean, sometimes all the pieces aren't on the playing board until it's game on. And right. You can't prep for everything in life. Life is full of unpredictability. Life is full of circumstances that shift with the wind. And if Grand Admiral Thrawn was so brilliant and so unbeatable, then the Bendu wouldn't have caused him any problems, nor the space whales. As Matthew says, without the whales taking his entire 7th fleet, he would have crushed Lothal because the rebellion never sent additional forces. Well, his return could also mean the return of the space whales. And that's been foreshadowed in the show quite a bit. We've even seen the space whales. We have a huge component that led to his defeat in Star Wars Rebels still very alive and present in the Star Wars galaxy. So I don't think his return is actually signed, sealed, and delivered to bring destruction to the New Republic and everything. So those are his 2 points, but here's the one that really got my attention. If you both at the end of the day think Dave doesn't care or have any say in the story of the new Thrawn books, you need to stop consuming death sticks and go home and rethink your life. So I responded to Matthew today, and, I had to meet his snarkiness with a little bit of snarkiness of my own. And my snarkiness can be sometimes very easy to tap into, as you lovely listeners know. It's sort of instinctual snarkiness almost.
It's a gift.
So I said, have you ever talked directly to Filoni about his involvement with the books? No. Didn't think so. We have. Our knowledge comes directly from the source. He has about as much interaction and involvement with the books that Lucas did, which is little to none.
Yeah.
And so Matt responded, hey, he gave me props for throwing some sassiness back at him. I like that. But he did present me with a source. There was a moment in Star Wars Celebration Europe back in April in which Dave Filoni did mention some collaboration with, well, collaboration might not be the word, but some meetings with Timothy Zahn. And I know Dave Filoni has always been very favorable whenever Timothy Zahn is brought up. He did read the Heir to the Empire Thrawn trilogy back in the early 90s, just like we all did. Anyone who considered himself a Star Wars fan in the early 90s was reading those suckers. And during the panel for the AHSOKA show, Filoni addressed this. He said he and fellow AHSOKA executive producer Jon Favreau, I'm reading from The Hollywood Reporter, Jon Favreau have been in touch with Zahn and plan on follow-up meetings because it's his thing, and I really feel privileged that Lars will bring him to life this way. We want to make sure we get it right. Okay, but that doesn't indicate that Dave Filoni is helping Timothy Zahn write these novels about Thrawn. It does show, though, that he has a respect for Timothy Zahn, knowing that Zahn is the guy who created Grand Admiral Thrawn, and I think that they're getting together to break down some characteristics of Thrawn and some backstory that, even if the backstory doesn't get presented in AHSOKA, it's important for guys like Lars to know who Thrawn is, like where he came from and where he's been and what he's achieved and things like that. And the expert on that is Timothy Zahn. Yeah, but it doesn't mean that Dave Filoni is reading the Thrawn books or he's helping Zahn write them, right, Jason?
No. This is Dave showing respect to Timothy Zahn, just like he showed respect to Peter Mayhew when they were animating Chewbacca, just like he showed respect to Ray Park when they were animating Darth Maul, brought these guys back. Of course, if you're going to utilize such a beloved character, and I say Thrawn is beloved, though there's a ton of affection for those books and for Thrawn. I mean, he's a bad guy, but people love him. And of course, Filoni's going to feel compelled. And Dave's just also that type of guy. He is a creator. He respects creators, the creative process, and he knows how important it was to have access to George Lucas, the maker, through all of his development. So yeah, he's going to want that primary source research through a guy like Timothy Zahn. But in terms of his interest, I don't think, from my discussions with Dave, and granted it's been some time, but from my discussions with Dave, he and I were sort of two peas in a pod when it came to the EU. We got through books like Shadows of the Empire and the initial Thrawn trilogy, and that was kind of it. And that's not a criticism. That's something he and I had in common. It doesn't mean that he doesn't value them, but it also doesn't mean that he's, going around trying to influence them. And he's certainly not beholden to them. That much was very, very clear. Going back to the Karen Travis Republic Commando debacle of the Clone Wars and the Mandalorian culture and all of that. I mean, Dave steamrolled all over that, as well he should. And I'm glad he did. With
George Lucas actually putting gas in the steamroller for sure.
Yes.
But, Dave, here's a book that Star Wars fans don't talk about often enough. It's Darth Maul Shadow Hunter. And I know Dave was a big fan of that book because he actually showed me some illustrations he made in his sketchbook based on moments in that novel. So, yeah. So he does have that, but he's not immersed in it to any degree. And I remember one time there was a marketing thing that happened. There was a book coming out, maybe the Star Wars Atlas. I don't remember what it was, but part of the marketing is like Dave Filoni's direct involvement. And Filoni told us, he's like, I don't know how that happened. They sent a couple questions to my assistant and I answered them, but that was really my only involvement. And I get the feeling that Dave told marketing to tamper down on that kind of stuff. Let's not make a mountain out of a mole here.
Right.
Largely the story group handles these types of details. it's not a full-on collaboration. I mean, that's how George Lucas handled things, and that's how Dave Filoni handles it. And guys like Timothy Zahn or E.K. Johnson, who wrote the Ahsoka novel, they get the guidelines and go from there via story group.
Yeah.
So, but Dave, he likes and respects Timothy Zahn. So, the meetings do happen. And Matt's point really is that Dave Filoni is incorporating what Timothy Zahn conjured up as far as Grand Admiral Thrawn, the character, from the book level in the Rebel series. And of course, that's only natural because Timothy Zahn introduced the character in the novels. So anytime the character shows up, it's going to incorporate at least something from the books.
Right. And the way that this all started was we were making the claim that the Thrawn, the on-screen Thrawn, does not really live up to this reputation.
Mm-hmm.
To which many people in the chat and others like Matt we heard from said, well, what do you mean? Just read the books. And my point is, we weren't having this argument surrounding the books. We were actually making observations about what we're seeing with our eyes in these on-screen stories with Grand Admiral Thrawn. So he might be a complete, total badass. I remember him being a very charismatic and interesting character in the novels, and I still think he's a charismatic and interesting character on screen. But what do we have? We've got Ahsoka shaking down this Morgan Elsbeth woman, doing everything she can to track her down because she had the map to Thrawn. We found that out in Mandalorian season 2. So Ahsoka is obsessed. I think you could say Ahsoka's obsessed with finding Thrawn or preventing the return of Thrawn. And Ahsoka's a pretty big deal. So what is it that has her just absolutely convinced that his return would usher in a new war and all hell would break loose, when what we know of the Empire at this time, the Remnant Empire, is that they're very fractured. And it's not like the New Republic hasn't experienced one of these warlords getting out of control. They did it with Moff Gideon.
Yeah. So, and also the Ahsoka obsession with Thrawn isn't really... There's no foundation for that in the Rebels show whatsoever. There was no interaction between Ahsoka and Thrawn. There was no conversation with Ahsoka about Thrawn. So this is all just kind of hitting us out of nowhere, and there's a lot that's just gradually being revealed. And so I think by the end of the series, we hopefully will have ticked off all the boxes for all these questions we have. And Grand Admiral Thrawn will be a giant threat, which he will be. And that will lead us into the next round of storytelling via another season of Mandalorian or Ahsoka or the Filoni live-action film that is going to be coming maybe in 2030. I don't know.
And don't forget that Thrawn was brought in to the Rebels series to create a foe for the Rebels crew that wasn't Darth Vader. It couldn't be Vader and Tarkin every time, because we know what happens with Vader and Tarkin. And you don't want to diminish, and these are Filoni's words, I'm paraphrasing, of course, but you don't want to diminish the legacy of guys like Tarkin and Vader, knowing how important they are, by having them lose to the Rebels every week. You can't do it. So he needed somebody else, and that somebody was Thrawn. So he was brought in as sort of a third string guy.
And I'm happy to see Filoni picking fruit off of the expanded universe tree. But I think that when you reintroduce characters like that, you want to establish foundations for them and not have the audience jumping to conclusions based on novels from 30 plus years ago. Right. That's just my take. So Thrawn, he's a coming. Timothy Zahn, he created Thrawn, and he deserves all the respect in the world for that. But the notion of Thrawn and Timothy Zahn creating the character, what type of ownership, Swank, do you think that provides Timothy Zahn with over the character? Do you think Timothy can legitimately claim ownership of the character, or is he just the creator of the character?
No, I think the only way to look at it would be that he was a hired gun at the time. A company paid him to write these books and give him some access to George Lucas, and everything that he created or wrote, lock, stock, and barrel belongs to Lucasfilm and now Disney.
Yeah.
So the best he can hope for is the kind of respect that a guy like Dave Filoni is showing him by bringing him in there. And this is not just unique to Timothy Zahn. This has been happening in the comic book industry for a long time. You know, do these creators own these characters, especially when they're, like I said, they're hired guns. They're paid to do a job.
Well, there certainly are a lot of fans of Timothy Zahn, and there's a lot of fans of the Thrawn trilogy, and I consider myself one of them for sure. And I met a guy named Cole Haddon. He's a screenwriter. He's a novelist. He's a journalist. Kyle Newman introduced me to him. And Cole's a really great guy. I think he's doing work for the BBC. And he also writes on Substack.com. He has a place there where he writes and muses about things. And he reached out to me. Oh, by the way, it's Substack.com at Cole Haddon, Haddon. And Cole reached out to me and said he'd like to have a Zoom chat about Timothy Zahn, heir to the Empire, and why doesn't Timothy Zahn get more credit for all the work the TV series have strip mined and continue to strip mine for parts. That is Cole's take. So we spoke for a while, and I'm going to play a couple clips for you from that conversation, and then you can go and read what Cole wrote about Grand Admiral Thrawn at substack.com/@ColeHaddon.
Do you know if he's published this yet?
I think it's going to be out by the time this podcast comes out.
All right, great.
So we'll float links on our website and socials and stuff like that. But the first part, we talked a little bit about how I was introduced to Heir to the Empire back in the day and what that book meant to me.
I always read the newspaper every morning. And I noticed in the Chicago Tribune, there was a little blurb in some column about how, forgive me, I can't remember the name of the publishing company. I want to say Del Rey, but it was like Ballantine maybe. I forget who it was, who brought Star Wars back and started the expanded universe with, and that really does start with Heir to the Empire. I mean, that's the legitimate first, like real, I think, authentic push to take Star Wars outside of films and be real about the stories, you know? But I'm getting ahead of myself. So I saw this blurb in the paper. So I knew it was coming. And I was anxious to get it. And I knew it had come out, but I wasn't really a bookstore kind of guy. I mean, I like newsstands and stuff, but I just felt weird as a college student to go looking for a Star Wars book. You know, it's kind of in the closet. I was really excited that the book was coming, but I was in the closet about it and was trying to be cool. And so I rolled into a bookstore and I was like, hey, do you have Heir to the Empire? And I was like, what is Heir to the Empire? He goes, oh, it's the Star Wars book. Why didn't you just say that? And I was like, well, I thought I'd be tipping my hand way too much, you know? Nerd alert.
Yeah.
But so I picked up the book then and there and devoured it, read it in like a week, which is uncommon for me. I would read a book, like when I'm going to bed and stuff, you read till you fall asleep. It takes maybe a month to read a book, read on a bus or whatever. But this one, it became my focus. Outside of, I think I was taking summer school classes at Columbia College that year, and and delivering pizzas. So I was reading the book, probably instead of studying, and in between pizza runs. Mm. And I had a 78 Monte Carlo. Okay? And I sat on the hood of that thing because it was summertime. And I was sitting out there. I didn't want to sit in the kitchen or anything. And I sat there and I read that book on the hood of the car. So I left like a butt dent on the hood of the car. And I just really, really liked that book. And I read a blurb about it at the time that I thought perfectly summed up the experience. Reading Timothy Zahn's words, you hear the John Williams soundtrack. Mm. And I thought, boy, is that true? Mm. That is so true. And I thought Thrawn himself was a really great character, but I was more into it for Han, Luke, and Leia. Mm. That's what I was. I wanted to see what happened after Return of the Jedi to those characters. And that novel gave you the first legitimate look.
Sure did. So much so, a lot of my friends thought they were actually reading the Star Wars sequel trilogy. They were convinced that this was going to be it.
There is no doubt that the Lucasfilm spin machine, the PR for the publisher, was selling this, packaging it, marketing it, selling it as the next Star Wars trilogy.
Well, yeah. And it required that sort of reputation, you know, for us fans to bite deep into it and enjoy it the way we did. We needed that sense of authenticity. But we also understood that George Lucas wasn't behind it. Timothy Zahn was. And that should George ever decide to make new Star Wars films, and the Zahn story could become obsolete. I think everyone was fine with that. Even Timothy Zahn himself.
Yeah, but the problem was people weren't fine with that.
Well, of course not. I mean, you know, fans are fickle, and we grow, you know.
The expanded universe, I mean, until Disney blew it up and called it Legends, it was you were committing high treason if you were a creator in Star Wars and went against so much as a word bubble in a Star Wars comic book.
Yeah,
and there was certainly hierarchy amongst the EU at the time. You know, people didn't expect crazy characters like Jackson necessarily to be considered canon, but stuff like Dark Empire, stuff like the Thrawn trilogy, you really, really had a lot of investment in those stories, and people spending years thinking of them as official continuations.
Sure. Oh my God, the way people loved Mara Jade.
Right.
Even Luke's girlfriend Callista had a rabid fan base, and nobody in the year 2023 remembers Callista. But she had a rabid fan base. Callie, they would call her. Oh, the memories. Okay, so more talk with Cole about Timothy Zahn, and let's get to the meat of the conversation. Should Zahn claim creative ownership of Thrawn? Does he have that right? We discuss.
With the news of Ahsoka, I had also been watching the Star Wars Rebels and Clone Wars, you know, but I ran through that with my son, ran through Rebels, and was reminded yet again of how much Thrawn and how much that has clearly influenced the world. And then I started seeing it pop up in the new series, the live action. And I would see these references to how Zahn was consulting, but he just, you know, as Kyle and I discussed, he's never on a red carpet, but the actress who played Ahsoka in the animated series is on every red carpet, even when she's no longer relevant to whatever is going on. So Zahn, as far as I'm concerned, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Zahn himself even said, if George Lucas wants to tell the story after, then, or any other movies, then what I write is disposable. Zahn took that approach. If George decided to tell stories, more Star Wars stories that would negate his or elements of his stories, he was fine with that. He knew what he was signing up for. So I thought that was nice. I saw Timothy Zahn at a convention last year in Nashville. I did not speak to him. I don't know him or anything. But I've seen him around over the years. And he seems to be a really nice guy, like low-key, humble. He seems like you can tell he's intelligent. But he's, I think he considers himself as just a guy who, he defers to what the filmmakers do with Lucasfilm, I think, even to this day. So when you talk about him getting credit or whatnot, that could be fine with him for all I know.
Yeah, it's that is itself a bit of mystery. I mean, last year he did a convention where he talked about that he offered his services to consult, and Filoni has said that he consulted with him, which sounds like a phone call, which it ends up sounding very much like people expect him to be relevant, and he's just not to the television conversation, which for me is disappointing because I guess shrug aside somebody so significant to the mythology while you're using significant chunks. I mean, have you seen Ahsoka yet?
Yes.
Yeah, which I really enjoyed. I felt it was an improvement. But the fact that it still feels like it's somehow derived from Heir to the Empire and a mashup in some way. It just feels strange to not see him on red carpets or doing press for it in any way, or being acknowledged outside of occasional commentary.
Well, again, I think it might come down to him a little bit. If he wanted a piece of that pie, he could be writing scripts and stuff and pitching them to Lucasfilm. Does he do that? I don't know. Maybe he does.
Yeah.
Maybe he doesn't want to have anything to do with it. Or maybe he does, and the stuff he's been pitching blows. Maybe he needs to stay in his lane, which is novels, science fiction novels.
Yeah, I like how pragmatic you are. You're very realistic about it. Would you, compared to Marvel, in stepping away from even Zahn, does it seem reasonable that Lucasfilm mines this treasure trove but never seems to acknowledge the people who originated the ideas along the way? That it's been a much more collaborative universe than one driven by singular visions.
Right. And it always comes down to the based on characters and situations created by George Lucas.
Yes.
That's your constant. So George gets that. And it reminds me of when you would see the Batman stories, it'd say created by Bob Kane. Now I think they got another name up there with them too. I can't remember. Or the guys who came up with Superman. They got screwed over. Those are the guys who really got screwed over back in the day. For Zahn, he signed on to a pre-existing IP. And in that situation, I believe these creatives do give up individual ownership of the things they're creating in the name of the IP. It's not about them anymore. It's about the machine. And they are just cogs in the wheel. They get paid for what they do, but, you know, red carpet treatment and all that stuff. I mean, I think that depends on the individual's personality. And if they go for it, you know, I mean, there are ways to go for it. You mentioned yourself, the AHSOKA animated actress, Ashley Eckstein, she's everywhere. Why is she everywhere? Because she goes for it. She goes for it. She does all of these things to maintain these pathways of connection to the fan base. And her popularity speaks for itself. And she's somebody that you like to have on the red carpet. Does Timothy Zahn have that quality? As a human being, he seems kind of bookish to me, you know? Stay in your lane.
Interesting. I'm going to have to cite that. Do you think it's fair to say that Star Wars was largely sustained in the 90s through Zahn? You know, that there's a decade of Star Wars that almost entirely rests on his shoulders?
Does it? Because there were other contributors there too. Kevin J. Anderson, for one. Lots of individuals. Michael Stackpole, Aaron Alston. I loved those expanded universes.
No, I did too, but did any of them resonate with the larger fan base to the same degree? You know, is it like myself? I have never heard anything other than the most diehard Star Wars fans cite Star Wars books outside of Zahn. They might cite moments, but you know, like the death of Anakin Solo. You know, that's a fantastic death. You know, I Jedi is a fantastic Kieran Horn book. You know, this sort of thing, but when you talk about the impact Star Wars book, you know, or your passion for the expanded universe, it always seems to be Timothy Zahn and others.
Yeah, I mean, I guess he is the poster boy, so he's got that. But like I said, there are a lot of contributors to the expanded universe, and me myself, while I did like the Thrawn trilogy, I adored it. The introduction of the new characters was fresh. It was, for all intents and purposes, the next trilogy at that time.
Yeah.
We were hungry for Star Wars. And Zahn delivered. He really did. But the follow-up books that he penned didn't grab me and didn't sustain me at all. Those Outbound Flights and Hand of Thrawn and all of that stuff. I mean, I can't make heads or tails of that stuff. It bored me to tears. So,
yeah, no, that's a fair point. I always felt that those books were largely handicapped by the need to conform to the rest of the EU, but I really enjoyed Scoundrels, the Ocean's 11 prequel. That was
that was a pretty good one. Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah. I was just taking some time as I was listening to that because, you know, I've always been fascinated by the way that the two franchises handled tie-in material, the two big Star franchises, Wars and Trek. And Trek had a lot of publishing success before Star Wars got into the game. And Gene Roddenberry was notoriously quite a control freak when it came to Star Trek, though Paramount always seemed to get in the way. But what he could control, he was very much wanting to do so. And he made it very, very clear that while people could experience more tales of Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, if you didn't see it on the screen, it is not canon. And Lucasfilm, I always felt that they tried to have their cake and eat it too. They didn't want to be beholden to it, but at the same time, Unless something else comes along, it is canon, which I guess it's somewhat of a fair way to approach it. It's canon until it's not.
Well, it kind of works that way in the comic book field, where these stories get retold, they get wiped out.
Right?
There's constantly number one issues. Number one, Batman number one. I'm like, what? It's the year 2023. Batman's been around since the 40s. How could this possibly be Batman number one? Well, they have another story to tell, and they're gonna take liberties with stories that have been told prior to get the job done, so that modern day contemporary fans can have a story that Star Wars has been really very much painting themselves in the corner over the years with this expanded universe material. And in the typical Lucasfilm fashion of ready, fire, aim, they're left picking up the pieces.
Yeah.
And or tap dancing around it, and fans are left picking up the pieces.
Well, what shocked me was in 2014 when the expanded universe, there was a stake put in the ground. Expanded universe is now Legends. Everything coming out under the Disney umbrella is canon. I thought, wait a minute, you didn't learn from the mistake. It doesn't matter that you never thought that this stuff was canon before. The fact is, the people reading it and buying it, they did. They did think it was canon. So to them,
of course,
it was. And now you're going to wipe it out and you're going to go, no, we're serious this time. But then they didn't really throttle the output. I didn't find them throttling it. What happened, and I'm just going by what I'm hearing guys like you say, and Kyle, who I know reads a lot of the books, what they went to was a very safe way of telling stories. They weren't telling big, bold stories. It was all very detailed minutia, and they weren't taking big risks, taking big chances because, my God, it's canon, and they were terrified that they were going to do something that could cause problems downstream. So on the one hand, Star Wars Legends, the original expanded universe, thrived because they weren't really beholden to it. And, things would even get somewhat silly. But then the newer stuff is so scared to trample on the future possibilities. Yeah, it's a very interesting conundrum. And of course, the longer these franchises are around, like you said, with comic books, they were the first to experience this because they've been around the longest. And you threw out a comment last night on the after show, which was great. You said, oh, laugh it up, kids, because guess what? Your Harry Potter is next. Wait till that gets rebooted. And we know that there's already a series underway for HBO Max. It's going to retell the entire Harry Potter saga, film saga, recast every season. Every book is going to be an entire season. So very ambitious, very ambitious.
Yeah. So, and there are changes that will be inevitable.
Yeah.
In Star Wars book news, there was an exciting announcement this week. John Jackson Miller is returning for the first time in 10 years to write a story about Qui-Gon Jinn and the final year of the Jedi Council prior to the events of the Phantom Menace. So everything leading up to the events of the Phantom Menace is going to be called The Living Force. Oh, yeah, sure, the Living Force, And it will see Qui-Gon Jinn, alongside Obi-Wan Kenobi, implore the Jedi Council to think beyond the confines of its chambers at the heart of the galactic core on Coruscant, when another ancient Jedi outpost on the planet Quen is set to be decommissioned. Boy, this sounds about as exciting as the crawl for the Phantom Menace. Trade routes have been blocked.
In dispute.
This is IO9 who broke the news today. After Qui-Gon pushes the order to stop turning inwards and serve the people of the galaxy, the entire council finds itself venturing to Quen on a mission of outreach. Except the problem with outreach means that some folks are going to take the rare opportunity of the Jedi Council leaving Coruscant to make a play to wipe out Jedi leadership in one fell swoop. So this could be interesting, or it could be a convoluted mess of spaghetti on the plate. But I like John Jackson Miller. I like Qui-Gon Jinn. I like The Phantom Menace. And stories have been told in the era leading up to The Phantom Menace, but this is a new take with new canon in mind. And it's going to feature all of our favorites. Mace Windu, Yoda, Yaddle, Depa Balapa, Apple Rancid, even Peel, Jason. I know you're a huge Even Peel guy.
Oh, yeah. Yes. I mean, there's Jedi and then there's Even Peel.
Plo Koon,
I like an
Ika.
uneven peel, actually, is my preference. But with a novel called The Living Force, which, by the way, I mean, just the title alone, and this is saying something, is enough to get me interested in that book, because that's really, I like that. That's the stuff that I really enjoy. I don't necessarily like, God, nothing irritates me more than to read a description of a lightsaber battle in a novel, or to read a description of dogfights with starships.
True. Now, some authors do have a skill at being able to paint a picture. I'm thinking of like Aaron Alston, for example. I brought him up in the conversation with Cole, and he was a guy who could actually visualize a dogfight in words. And so I thought that was really
I would imagine that it's not an easy task, and that there are going to be some that are more, that are better at it than others. But
yes,
what I really love, I love the character stuff. And if this was, I always point to Darth Plagueis. I know it's one of my absolute favorites, if not my very favorite Star Wars novel I've ever read, because it was so illuminating into the characters, and it didn't get bogged down into a lot of minutia and detail. It was telling a really big, bold story, the origin of Palpatine. And so with a novel like this, The Living Force, what I would expect is for it to really put on center stage the Qui-Gon living force philosophy versus the more buttoned up Jedi Council view of the Force. So, but this description doesn't really paint that. It's
that's IO9.
Yeah.
But they do quote John Jackson Miller here, and he paints maybe a more clear picture. While the Jedi are dealing with bureaucratic demands of an increasingly corrupt republic, Qui-Gon challenges them to get out of the council chamber and rediscover the Jedi they used to be.
So they
go on a road trip.
I like.
So all the masters on the council split, and they visit another part of the galaxy. And what they see, what they experience helps them grow. And in the meantime, while they are away from Coruscant, pirates see an advantage. And so they make a move on Coruscant, I believe, from what I'm reading here. And so then the Jedi have to return to face that challenge. And the Living Force is all about being in the present. Right. And the Jedi spend a lot of time contemplating the future. And I think Qui-Gon Jinn is looking to break them out of all of that and apply themselves.
But Master Yoda says I should be mindful of the future. Keep your... Yes.
But at what risk? You're taking your eyes off the prize.
Right.
You have to be
But not at the expense of the moment, he says.
Right.
Keep your focus on the here and now.
So that's something to look forward to.
Yeah.
I probably will dive into it. I like John Jackson Miller. He's a nice guy, and a guy who is a good writer and understands Star Wars, in my opinion. So
cool.
That'll be interesting to look out for.
It's a little breaking news for you. All right. How about we open up the old voicemail, see what's popping in there? I'm sure there's something about AHSOKA.
Yeah. Let's do
imagine.
it.
You must contact me.
Play back the entire message.
What message?
Message, Arthur, the message.
The Emperor commands you to make contact with him. It's a trick. Send no reply.
Hey guys, this is Patreon member Bryce from Utah. I just got done listening to the after show. It was awesome. You guys hit so many great points. But one thing I was thinking about is you'd say Sabine still hasn't shown any force abilities. And when I was watching that last episode, I thought that when she was fighting Shin, she raises her hand and Shin's shoulder gets flown back, and there's even a little bit of a soundtrack cue that sounds like force to me, and I thought that was her displaying her first, showing of the force. Anyway, just wanted to know your thoughts on that. And then the other thing I wanted to know, if I was the only one on this, is at the end when she goes to the world between worlds and you hear the hey snips, was anybody else thinking that she should have turned around with a smile on her face and said, Sky Guy, with a question mark? But anyway, that's just something I thought that opportunity missed. Let me know what you think. Thanks. Bye.
Yeah, I know exactly what he's referring to, and it was a cool moment. It was a great moment, but it's not what he's thinking it was. And
no, it certainly is not.
Yeah, it was a showdown, the showdown between Shin, the rematch between Shin and Sabine. Sort of, there was this moment where Sabine had no weapon. She was trying to reach into the force and make something happen. And Shin looks at her, drops her weapon, looks at her and says, "You have no power." And Sabine just clicks her wrists, and one of those, Mandalorian wrist gauntlets sent out a blast at Shin. So yeah, it wasn't force ability. The sound that you heard was Mandalorian tech around her wrist. I thought it was a cool moment. She certainly improvised, and maybe she was even sort of manipulating Shin a little bit to just kind of stall enough, knowing what a egomaniac Shin seems to be, just get her to lower her weapon enough, let her guard down, watch, what is she trying to do with this? Oh, is she trying to use the force? Then bang, hit her with the old wrist gauntlet.
Yeah, either that or the gauntlet jammed up on her momentarily. I mean, there's all kind of different ways you can interpret
that could be, right? That could be. Yeah.
But when she does hold the hand up, Shin kind of recoils a little bit and turns, bracing herself clearly.
Right.
Because that's Shin's world. I mean, she exists within a world of the Force and Force users. So if somebody, suddenly makes a move at her, she's going to flinch. I mean, say for some reason you don't have a hand, okay? But you still have your arm. You can still cock back like you're going to punch somebody, and but you don't have a hand.
Right.
So they don't really need to. So she slowly comes in. But again, I need a definitive answer here. So as always, we look at the audio descriptive track for the show. And the audio descriptive track stated that Shin instinctively turned away from what she felt might be an incoming force blow, but immediately recognized that there was nothing, no power packed into the punch. There was nothing there. So she had the revelation that, Sabine was just pretending, essentially. I think Sabine was trying to force push her in a moment of desperation and could not connect with the Force, as she never could. The Force has blessed Sabine. If you look at the Rebel series, she was jumping around, leaping around, pulling off incredible physical moves as we were watching that show. And we questioned, is this because of the aesthetic of animation, or is this indicating that she can jump and move like a Jedi does? We had those conversations back in the day, but there was nothing ever to back it up until we got to this AHSOKA series, where it's assumed that AHSOKA somehow felt like Sabine had some force ability. A lot of people are saying AHSOKA is just completing the training Kanan couldn't complete.
Yeah, I'm hearing that too, and
I don't see it that way.
I don't either.
Kanan was training her on lightsaber methods because of the dark saber.
Right.
And the dark saber is that golden cow for the Mandalorians that you have to legitimize your leadership. So it was very important for her to learn lightsaber skills. And yes, that is a Jedi discipline that is to be learned. But I never got the feeling that Kanan was training her to tap into the Force in any way, shape, or form outside of just a normal person's natural connection to the Force. I don't think she had like the ability to control the Force, but you always have to be open to it, whether or not you're blessed with actually being able to touch the Force. But you have to be open to it for the Force to touch you. And I think that was maybe part of Kanan's lessons to her. But the bottom line was just so she would learn sword skills with the darksaber and how to duel with them. And then people were saying, oh my God, they put that helmet on Sabine when Ahsoka was training her that made Sabine have no sight. It's like, isn't that a slap in the face to the memory of Kanan Jarrus? I read this stuff online. I was like, oh, I never thought of that. But Ahsoka is not continuing the training that Kanan Jarrus gave Sabine. That was very specific training to learn how to duel with the darksaber so she could rise to a leadership role among the Mandalorians.
And he does get a little in his, if I remember the training sequences correctly, look, he's a Jedi. Of course he's going to talk like a Jedi when he's talking about saber training and focus and all of these things. But it was, you're absolutely right, Jim. It was not about her learning the Jedi arts. It was for sure relegated to the training so that she could win back the darksaber.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is a Jedi art to be trained in how to use a saber. General Grievous himself stated that. I've been trained in your Jedi arts by Count Dooku. So, I mean, but that's specifically lightsaber dueling. Dooku didn't train Grievous on how to force push, how to use the Jedi mind trick, all of that stuff, how to levitate things. None of that was part of the thing. It was just specifically lightsaber duel training. So thanks, Bryce. I mean, that's he's got his ears open. He's got his eyes open.
Yes.
He's looking for hints and clues. And there's a lot of foreshadowing going on in the show. So I don't think any line of dialogue or any moment in this show should be overlooked because it'll come back around to have an impact later in the second half of the season. And Bryce from Utah is on the right track. He's doing the right thing. He's my kind of fan.
Yes. And as far as getting a little sky guy out of Ahsoka,
I don't agree with. No, Bryce is way off.
I wouldn't count it out yet. We got a
no, not yet.
I think there could be a sky guy at some point.
There has to be, but I don't want it in.
He has to finish it.
Hugely dramatic moment where we're being stripped away from the current environment and dropped into this mythical environment, and then she slowly turns around and sees Anakin Skywalker, who she hasn't seen in decades. And imagine the flow of emotion that conjures up in Ahsoka for her to just turn around and start being boppy. Hey, Sky Guy. That would have destroyed the dramatic tension of the moment.
Yeah, it really
And that
would've.
dramatic tension is at the end of the episode, so it's meant to carry us for a week. And a happy reunion like that might not be appropriate, as we'll see in part 5 of Ahsoka, where I think some stuff is going to hit the fan. So can't wait for number 5. Thank you so much, Bryce from Utah. Keep the voicemail coming. Whatever you observe, whatever you think about and have an opinion about, or speculation, comments, insights, we want it all. So keep the voicemail coming. You can find our voicemail hotline at rebelforceradio.com.
All right, what do we got here? We've got headlines. That's what we got.
I have good news for you, my lord.
That's good news. Come closer, I have good news.
All right. Diana Lee Inosanto, Morgan Elsbeth, a very formidable character, and I think one of the characters in Ahsoka that has a ton of presence when she's on screen. It's probably helped by the fact that we know that she can fight. You know, she kind of held her own there against Ahsoka for a little bit back in Mandalorian season 2. But her, discovering that she's actually a witch, maybe even a Dathomirian witch, I guess we assume she is. I don't know that she's actually come out and said that. She calls herself a survivor, but the only witches we've really seen in Star Wars, other than that, the one that was in the Ewok movie, wasn't she a witch?
Oh, yeah, right. Remember her?
Yeah, I can't think of her name right now. But,
yeah.
But anyway, so she's very compelling, interesting character. Fun to see live action Star Wars witches. But I guess we've got some clips from her talking to the folks at Entertainment Weekly.
Yeah. And she talks about her character, Morgan Elsbeth, and indicates that we still have a little bit to learn about this character.
I can definitely talk about her unswavering allegiance to Thrawn for sure. I mean, she's definitely somebody who's probably very faithful to his causes and his ideas. And so that's one of the things I think I can share with people is, again, her loyalty, and then I'm excited because we are going to go into her backstory, her back history somewhat. And I know people have been trying to guess about, what's her issue? What's her deal? And I'm really happy that we are definitely going to explore this in Ahsoka. And it probably will make more sense as the show goes on, for sure.
Wow. Probably makes sense as the show goes on or if the show goes on. I couldn't catch.
She said as the
okay,
show
good.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah. It's going to happen this season, Jason.
Yeah, okay. All right. I'm just making sure it's not one of those. Boy, it'd be great. I'd love to have more backstory. Hopefully we'll get another season and then we can.
Oh.
Yeah.
No.
That's a story for another time.
Well, she talks about the loyalty to Thrawn.
We know that.
Yes, we do know that, although I don't know. I mean, the witches aren't necessarily known so far for their loyalty, other than they're on their own side. Mm-hmm. So I've been skeptical about whether she's a real acolyte of Thrawn or there's some mutual gain between the two. Does she owe him something? Because she's spending a literal fortune, has spent a literal fortune to make this happen. And she's been spending a lot of time on it too. It's not, something that she just thought of one day and we'll do this. It's taken a ton of planning and great risks, obviously. So what's in it for her? I guess blind loyalty or just, is that enough?
She has to have some stake in this game other than just being loyal to Grand Admiral Thrawn. You said it best, Jason. What's in it for her?
Yeah.
What is in it for her? I think we'll find out in the second half of this season. Diana Lee Inosanto, obviously skilled martial artist, goddaughter to the legend Bruce Lee.
Amazing.
Her father, Dan Inosanto, is one of these top-tier martial artists and has been for a long time. I don't think he's around anymore.
Yeah, it's kind of odd given her pedigree that we haven't seen her do much of anything other than stand there and look menacing and pensive.
She certainly did perform martial artistry in Mandalorian season 2.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm saying in Ahsoka so far.
Yeah, well,
she really
something's coming. I mean, you even have a frame up here of her showing down. She's got a showdown with Ahsoka. She's got the spear again, and Filoni is there directing. This looks like this is from The Mandalorian.
Yeah, I think this is from Mandalorian season 2.
Yeah. Well, I expect action coming from Diana Lee, and she explains to Entertainment Weekly how she appeared on Dave Filoni's radar in the first place.
Before I worked on Mandalorian, I think John and Dave had this powwow, this meeting of the minds. And I think it was John that might have suggested to Dave, let's try to find somebody who's authentically a martial artist. So from there, I guess they both agreed, but hopefully somebody that could act as well. And so, from what Dave had shared with me is that he went down the rabbit hole looking for a female martial artist. And it's just so extraordinary because Google led him to a photo of mine. And, he clicked on my photo and it led him to this trailer to a movie I did called The Sensei, actually. And then he started investigating my background, and he found out who my father was and who my godfather was. And, when you had your father being Dan Inosanto and your godfather being Bruce Lee, these are two big cheeses in the martial arts world. I think that helped.
Oh, I'm sure it didn't hurt.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, she certainly has the pedigree, and, she's very well spoken. You can tell there's a lot of excitement behind those words. I think she's really digging being part of the Star Wars universe, that's for sure. And she's got a couple action figures coming. I think we've seen a vintage collection figure, so the 3 3/4 and the Black Series released of Morgan Elsbeth. And, I'm glad to see that. I think she and her character definitely deserves to get the figure treatment. It's getting to be, I got to tell you, it's almost like winning an award in the Star Wars series, because not every character used to be, we took for granted that all these characters, every background character got an action figure. But now it's a lot more choosy who gets immortalized in plastic, and Morgan Elsbeth and Diana Lee Inosanto they got the plastic treatment in both scales. So
and shall be proudly and prominently displayed in this guy's Star Wars collection. I just want to note her dad, Dan Inosanto, is still around. Oh. And he is an authority on Jeet Kune Do, Filipino martial arts, and a whole slew of other things. And he's credited for training martial arts to a number of Hollywood actors, including, of course, Bruce Lee, Chuck Norris, and others.
Wow.
So
Chuck.
Dang. He is a legend, and you can see him in the film I Am Bruce Lee. So in that film, he talks about the friendship the two men shared, and his experience as being a teacher to Bruce Lee. And he's the guy who taught Bruce Lee how to use the nunchucks. Holy smokies. This guy has got some serious cred. And his daughter is Morgan Elsbeth, Diana Lee Inosanto.
Right.
She's gosh, does she sound like just a wonderful person here in these interview clips? She talks about how, without knowing it, she actually has been training for this role in Star Wars her whole life.
Thank goodness from Dad, I have a weapons background. I've learned how to work with swords and spears and all, you name it. In fact, it's kind of funny because when I was a little girl and I first saw Star Wars, it was when my father was having an international martial arts camp in Aspen, Colorado. And in the evening, all the students, we all went to the theater to see Star Wars, right? And to have that experience of watching the audience, and my father just got thrilled with it. And I remember after we saw Star Wars, he goes, honey, I bet you could do a double lightsaber. And he would train me in martial arts with these plastic, how can I say, they're like telescopic staffs in a way that were supposed to resemble a lightsaber. And it's just the irony that he was training me with these, and he would come at me with double staff plastic lightsabers. And who knew that down the road I would actually be doing this fight scene with Rosario. And it's just the irony, the synchronicity of it all. Maybe the Force is really out there. Maybe it's real.
For sure.
Should we read too much into this? Was she referring to the fight she had with Rosario and Mandalorian, or was she talking about a fight that she has coming up with Rosario? Because she's talked about double lightsabers. She wasn't talking about a staff.
Well, that's the brilliance about those comments, is that she can get away with revealing or maybe not. I mean, is she talking about the future? Is she talking about the past? Listen, you know there's going to be a showdown between Morgan and Elsbeth. Yes. There's going to be Elsbeth versus Tano 2, Caesar's Palace, this fall.
Yeah. All right. So she's not the only Ahsoka actress talking to the media. Entertainment Weekly, as a matter of fact. We've also got Shin Hati. And
These actors are talking to the media. They made it clear that these were interviews conducted prior to the
Entertainment Weekly. They really got ahead of the game. They knew this shit was going to happen.
Yeah, they sure did.
They canned a bunch of stuff.
Yeah. It's like
thank God they did.
They had like secret microphones planted in Rosario Dawson's house just in case.
Right.
We have to have the content. Well, and thank God they did, because they're providing us with content. And we always recommend that you check out these interviews yourself at entertainmentweekly.com. So here is Ivanna Shakno.
Yeah.
Getting to know you, getting to know Ivanna Shakno. So she gives us her take on Shin Hati, and of course she has to be, walk on eggshells, so she doesn't reveal too much, but she provides a little bit of insight to the character.
She's very calculated, and at times she is impatient, but she's a seeker, and I think she's only in the beginning of finding her own voice. Throughout just getting to discover her, she has taught me a lot about understanding that intensity within somebody, and I really think that there might be quite a few people who may resonate with some sides of her and her desire to understand her surroundings and understand if it's something that is true to her nature.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, boy, these Star Wars actors are really well prepped because they're almost like politicians. They say a lot of words, and then you start trying to see, what do you mean by that? And it's there's not a whole lot of meaning. But what we can piece together is that she's definitely a very driven character. That's for sure. Wanting to understand her surroundings. It's a very force-sensitive kind of trait. And she does seem very obedient to Baylan so far, which we've seen a lot of impetuous Padawans, Anakin being one, Luke Skywalker being one. That's sort of a hallmark of Padawans. I don't get that from her. She is very, very loyal, and I don't think we've seen her really talk back at all to Baylan or push back on him.
No, but from those comments, I can read between the lines. And she said this is a character finding her own voice, which indicates to me that we will see an evolution of Shin Hati from subservient to Baylan's skull to assertive around Baylan's skull. And I predict that will generate some conflict as she finds her own voice. I don't think Baylan's skull doesn't seem like the type of guy who is like, he's going to take your temperature and try to find out what your opinion of the matter is.
Yeah, no.
You're going to march to the beat of his drum. Yeah. What happens when Shin finds her own voice and starts marching to the beat of her own drum? That's what I take out of those comments, is that there's going to be an evolution of this character beyond the subservient role that we currently have seen her in through the first half of Ahsoka. That's my take.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to watch her grow. She hasn't had a lot of dialogue. That's one thing.
Right.
Yeah.
But in what few words and in what few actions she's actually provided thus far, I feel an impact. I feel an impact by the performance. I feel an impact by the character. I feel an impact by her interactions with other characters. She could prove to be the most interesting of all the characters in this season of Ahsoka once the character fully emerges. She's still emerging. So we'll see how the events and circumstances lead to her finding her own voice. That's the big line I take out of her comments, is that this is an emerging character, and we have yet to see what she's capable of.
All right. Well, speaking of what you're capable of, I think it's time.
Are we going to hit the clubs?
I think we're going to hit the clubs.
All right. Is there a cover charge? There's no cover charge. We
Not
can
for
just
us.
walk right in.
No, not for us. We don't even have to wait behind the velvet ropes. We just get right in.
We get right in, right?
Yeah.
So Jeff Ulisny, Puppet Lando's producer, Jeff Ulisny, is a crazy MFer. Let me just say that. And he got an idea. He got inspired. He got inspired to take the classic Puppet Lando song, I Want My Felt to Be Felt. You've heard it. You love it.
Oh, yeah.
But you never heard it like this before. This is I Want My Felt to Be Felt Club Mix World Debut. So get on that treadmill and start running because this is going to pump you up.
Hit it?
Hit it. You're soft as a puppet because you're made of felt, but I get it. Smooth isn't cool, right? Okay, yeah, you got it. Yeah, but you want to be, you want your felt to be felt, is what you're saying.
I think that's the name of the next track.
I want my felt to be felt. I want my felt to be felt.
You want your felt to be felt.
Felt.
I want my felt to be felt.
Felt. I want my felt to be felt. I want my felt to be felt.
You want your felt to be felt.
Felt to be felt.
I want my felt to be felt.
Felt to be felt.
You want your felt to be felt.
Felt to be felt.
I want my felt to be felt.
Felt to be felt.
No. Felt.
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 To be felt.
You put this on for your lady. You got a little Colt 45. You really got something there.
Are you telling me it's a sure thing?
It works every time. So remember, you got to bring it, ladies. I mean, I may be smooth, but I can't do all the work.
Whoa. That was genius. Holy smokes. You can download the track right now at Bandcamp. Just look for Puppet Lando, I Want My Felt to Be Felt, the DJ Lothcat Electro Swing Mix. And wow, DJ Lothcat really did one hot mix on I Want My Felt to Be Felt. And I love how we were incorporated into it.
Yeah,
too,
that was nice. Does that mean that we get some of the royalties or the publishing rights, or we get?
I just want the roll-off ladies from Puppet Lando. That's all I want. I want to be in his wake. That's all I require is his fan base to worship me as much as they, well, half as much as they worship him. But thanks, DJ Lothcat. DJ Lothcat. That's Jeff, you listening. Look for Puppet Lando. I Want My Felt to Be Felt, the Electro Swing remix. It's on Bandcamp. We'll have links on rebelforceradio.com, and we'll light up the socials with it over the weekend. So you can listen to it whenever you want.
Yeah, swing into your weekend with Puppet Lando.
We're getting closer.
That's the wrong theme. Swing into your weekend. Swing into your weekend with Puppet Lando.
Chewie, get us out of here!
Oh, yeah, that'll wrap things up for us this week. 2 shows this week in the can. Don't forget to check out the AHSOKA After Show, available on the podcast feed as well as on YouTube, the official Rebel Force Radio YouTube channel. Speaking of which, throw us a sub over there on YouTube. The stats are telling us that a lot of you are watching the show, but you're not subscribed. So it's nothing. Just click the subscribe. Really does help. I know a lot of this stuff, you hear it, you're like, hit the like button, hit the subscribe. It really does make a difference. That's what the YouTube gods want to see. They want to see how long you're watching and how many of you are watching. That's what matters. All right, more Rebel Force Radio can be found at Patreon. Go to patreon.com/Rebel Force Radio. In addition to the weekly full show video for all access members, there are exclusive podcasts that you can't find anywhere else, including RFR, Q&A, the Babu Freaks, RPG. What's going to happen with Podcastus?
What hasn't happened to Podcastus? I mean, what hasn't happened? Wow, what an exciting adventure. Our heroes on the latest RFR RPG are attempting to escape the wall city of Isis as they have made their getaway from an Imperial stronghold. And we got some friends along for the ride this time. Joining Podcastus and Grando the Grand, a.k.a. Tyler Page, we have Jackson and Cassian Andor. And I'll tell you what.
Star-studded.
I'll tell you what. The dynamics between Pod and Cassian are, there's a lot of friction there, let's just say. Let's just say Cassian has never quite worked with a Rebel operative like Podcastus before. Yeah. So that's a lot of fun. Thank you so much to our...
Forget about it.
Oh, God. Yeah, nothing prepared Cassian for... Podcastus.
Not even Saw Gerrera.
No, Saw Gerrera's a walk in the park compared to the headaches that Podcastus is providing for Rebel to the Bone, Cassian Andor. So I just want to thank our game master, Matt Rashid. He's just kicking butt and taking names, and me and Tyler are having a great time as I am gradually being exposed to the world of RPG and having a lot of fun with it. Having a lot of fun. So we invite you guys to join us over on Patreon, patreon.com/Rebel Force Radio, and you can get every episode of RFR RPG. You can get every episode of the Babu Freaks, every episode of RFR Q&A. We are at over 170 episodes now. And other shows are also available, along with ad-free episodes of Rebel Force Radio and full show video. Get it all at Rebel Force Radio on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Rebel Force Radio.
All right, and we want you to stay engaged with us here. We love to hear from you. You can follow us on the socials on Facebook and Instagram. Also, the official website for all things and everything Rebel Force Radio can be found at rebelforceradio.com. But if you want to help us out, the best way to do it is just to keep doing what you're doing, keep listening, keep telling your friends about it. There's never a better time to introduce someone to Rebel Force Radio than when there's a new Star Wars show on the air. And there's so much to talk about. So if you have that friend at the day job or wherever, and you're just, you can't do it all. Like Puppet Lando just said, come on, ladies, you got to bring it. I can't do it all. Well, I know you can't do it all, but we can. So turn your friend onto Rebel Force Radio, and we'll do our best to hold their little handy through the entire Ahsoka series. So yeah, keep listening, keep telling your friends. Subscribe if you can, if your podcatcher of choice allows you to do so. We'd love to have your subscription. If it allows you to write a review, we love your reviews. We read them all. Just one rule, please.
Make them good.
So that'll do it. We'll see you next time here on Rebel Force Radio. Don't forget, Ahsoka After Show, looking at Part 5, Wednesday night, 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. And if you're lucky enough to be one of those going out to one of the theatrical screenings, drop us an email, show@rebelforceradio.com. Let us know how your experience was in seeing Ahsoka on the big screen. Our own Tyler Page is going to be there. Where is he? In the Chicago area? He's going to be at the Ahsoka screening, Tyler?
Yeah, out in Skokie. There's only one screening in the Chicago area. It's happening at Skokie. You can find the information online. Just look up Ahsoka Part 5 screening or theatrical screening. It's at AMC. So look that up. I don't have all the info at my fingertips, but it's happening.
Go to StarWars.com. They've got it all over there.
You know it.
All right. We'll see you next time. For Rebel Force Radio, I'm Jason.
I'm Jimmy Mack.
And remember,
The Force will be with you, always.